My name is Sarah. I'm 26 years old, and 8 months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I was planning my dream wedding, had a man who loved me unconditionally, and despite their flaws, I believed my family would always have my back. God, was I naive. What I'm about to tell you will make your blood boil, because it sure as hell made mine. It was a Tuesday evening when my phone rang. Dad's name flashed on the screen, and something in my gut twisted. He never called during the week unless something was wrong. I answered on the second ring, expecting maybe news about Grandma's health or some family emergency. Instead, I got the verbal equivalent of a sledgehammer to the chest. Sarah, we need to talk. Now. Come to the house. The tone was ice-cold, authoritative. The same voice he used when he fired employees at his company. I should have hung up right then. Should have known that nothing good ever came from that tone. But like the obedient daughter I'd been trained to be for 26 years, I dropped everything and drove over. Walking into that house felt like entering a courtroom where I was already guilty. Mom sat rigid on the leather sofa, her arms crossed, wearing that pinched expression she reserved for discussing disappointments. My sister Emma lounged in Dad's chair like she owned the place, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. And Dad? Dad stood behind his mahogany desk like some corporate overlord about to deliver a hostile takeover. Sit down, he commanded. I remained standing. Something primal in me refused to make myself smaller in that moment. We've made a decision about your wedding, he announced, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. We're not funding the circus anymore. Circus. He called my wedding a circus. The wedding I'd been planning for months, agonizing over every detail, trying desperately to make it perfect enough to earn their approval. The word hit me like acid. Mom leaned forward, her voice dripping with false concern. Darling, we're just looking out for your future. Michael isn't suitable. He doesn't have the background, the education, the prospects. You're settling, and we won't enable it. Emma couldn't contain her glee any longer. She laughed, actually laughed, and said, finally, someone's talking sense. Sarah, you can't seriously think marrying a construction worker is going to make you happy. What will people say? What will our friends think? The rage building in my chest was unlike anything I'd ever felt. It was molten, consuming, threatening to burn through my ribcage. But I'd learned long ago that showing emotion in this house was seen as weakness, as proof that you couldn't handle adult conversations. So I stood there, feeling my heart shatter into 1,000 pieces, and I looked each of them in the eye. Understood, I said simply. The room went silent. They'd expected tears, begging, maybe a dramatic breakdown they could use to justify their decision. Instead, they got calm acceptance, and I could see it unsettled them. Good. Let them wonder what I was thinking. Let them worry about what came next. I turned and walked out of that house without another word, leaving them sitting in their toxic little circle, probably congratulating themselves on handling me so well. But here's what I want to know from you. What would you do if your own parents tried to erase your wedding, your happiness, your future? Comment below, because what happened next will make you question everything about family loyalty. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation, the cold dismissal, the casual cruelty. Michael held me while I cried, and I could see the pain in his eyes too. He'd never been anything but respectful to my family, had bent over backwards to win their approval. He worked 60-hour weeks, had built a successful contracting business from nothing, treated me like a queen. But because he didn't have an Ivy League degree or a trust fund, he wasn't good enough for their precious daughter. The next morning, my phone started buzzing. Text after text, each one a fresh knife wound. The Ritz has been notified. The wedding is canceled. Dad spoke to the caterer. They understand the situation. Mom. Florist was very understanding too. Smiling face with smiling eyes, Emma. They weren't just withdrawing funding. They were actively destroying everything we'd built. Every vendor we'd carefully selected, every detail we'd agonized over, every dream we'd shared, they were systematically dismantling it all. And they were doing it with a smile. I called the Ritz immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. Miss Thompson? Yes, we received the cancellation notice from your father this morning. Since he's the primary on the contract. Wait, what? I never authorized any cancellation. Well, ma'am, your father explained that there had been a change in circumstances. He seemed to have the authority to make these decisions. Authority. Like I was still a child who couldn't make her own choices. Like my wedding was some kind of corporate acquisition they could just write off when it became inconvenient. The caterer told me the same story. So did the florist, the photographer, the musicians. One by one, they'd been contacted and told the wedding was off. Some sounded genuinely sorry. Others seemed relieved, one less headache to deal with. But Emma's text message was the one that made me see red. Don't worry, sis. I'm sure you can find somewhere nice for a small ceremony. Maybe the community center? Face with tears of joy. That's when I realized this wasn't about protecting me or looking out for my future. This was about power. This was about control. This was about making sure I stayed in my lane, stayed dependent, stayed small enough to fit into their perfect little box of expectations. The worst part? I could hear Emma's delighted laughter echoing in my head. She was enjoying this. My pain, my humiliation, my heartbreak, it was entertainment for her. You want to know the truth about my family? About the years that led up to this moment? Buckle up, because this story goes way deeper than a canceled wedding. I was 5 years old when I first remember my dad sitting me down and explaining what my life was going to look like. Not asking what I wanted, not encouraging me to dream, telling me what was going to happen. I would study hard, get perfect grades, attend the college he chose, marry someone he approved of, and live the life he designed for me. Sarah's going to be a lawyer, he'd tell his friends at dinner parties, while I sat there in my frilly dress, smiling on command. Just like her old man. Maybe she'll even take over the firm someday. I never wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a teacher or maybe a writer. I loved stories, loved working with kids, loved the idea of making a difference in small, meaningful ways. But every time I mentioned these dreams, Dad would laugh and ruffle my hair. That's cute, sweetheart, but teaching doesn't pay the bills. Writing is a hobby, not a career. You need something stable, something respectable. Respectable. That word haunted my childhood. Everything had to be respectable. My clothes, my friends, my hobbies, my thoughts, all filtered through the lens of what other people would think of the Thompson family. Emma, meanwhile, was the golden child who could do no wrong. When she wanted to study art history, it was following her passion. When she dropped out of 3 different graduate programs, it was finding herself. When she racked up credit card debt pursuing her latest business venture, handmade jewelry, then a boutique that failed within 6 months, then some pyramid scheme involving essential oils, it was just learning experiences. But when I dared to question why I had to follow the path they'd laid out for me, I was being difficult and ungrateful. The double standard was suffocating. Emma got to make mistakes, got to explore, got to fail and be supported through it all. I got to be perfect or nothing. I got A's because B's weren't acceptable. I joined the debate team because it looked good on college applications, not because I enjoyed it. I dated boys from good families who bored me to tears because they fit the image my parents wanted to project. By the time I was 18, I felt like a stranger in my own life. I'd been so busy being the daughter they wanted that I'd lost track of who I actually was underneath all their expectations. College was supposed to be my escape, but even there, their control followed me. They chose my major, my dorm, even tried to influence which friends I made. Network with the right people, Sarah. Make connections that will serve you later. I was a puppet dancing to their tune, and I didn't even realize how tangled up in their strings I'd become. Then I met Michael during my senior year, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. He was nothing like the men my parents had paraded in front of me. He didn't come from money, didn't have family connections, didn't even finish college. What he had was integrity, kindness, and a work ethic that put trust fund babies to shame. He'd started working construction at 16 to help support his single mother and younger siblings. By 25, he'd saved enough to start his own contracting company. He employed 8 people, owned his home outright, and treated everyone from his employees to the grocery store clerk with genuine respect. When he looked at me, he didn't see the Thompson family name or my potential earning capacity. He saw me, the real me underneath all the polish and pretense. He made me laugh, encouraged my dreams, and never once made me feel like I needed to be perfect to deserve love. The first time I brought him home to meet my parents, I knew we were in trouble. Dad barely looked up from his newspaper when I introduced them. When Michael extended his hand for a shake, Dad glanced at it like it might be dirty before giving it a perfunctory squeeze. "So, Michael," Mom said with that fake smile she wore to charity galas, "what do you do?" "I run a construction company, ma'am. We specialize in residential renovations and custom homes." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my parents exchange one of their loaded looks, the kind that spoke volumes without saying a word. "How entrepreneurial," Mom finally managed, the word dripping with condescension. Emma smirked from across the room. "Construction. How hands-on." The dinner that followed was an exercise in barely concealed hostility. Dad interrogated Michael about his background, his education, his long-term prospects. Mom made pointed comments about the importance of matching in relationships. Emma just sat there looking smug, like she was watching a particularly entertaining reality show. Michael handled it all with grace, answering their questions honestly, never rising to their baits. But I could see the muscle in his jaw ticking, could feel the tension radiating from him. He was too polite to call them out, but I knew he saw exactly what they were doing. After he left, they wasted no time sharing their opinions. "He seems nice," Mom said, which in our family was code for completely unsuitable. "Sarah, darling, you have to think about your future," Dad added. "About the kind of life you want to build. This young man, while I'm sure he's a decent person, simply doesn't move in our circles. You'd be limiting yourself." "He's not good enough for you," Emma said bluntly. "You could do so much better. What about that lawyer from the country club? Or that investment banker Mom introduced you to?" I felt something crack inside me that night. These people who claimed to love me, who said they wanted what was best for me, couldn't see what I saw in the man who made me happier than I'd ever been. They couldn't see past their prejudices and social climbing to recognize genuine goodness when it was sitting right in front of them. But I was still trapped in the pattern of seeking their approval, still desperately hoping they'd come around if I just proved to them how wrong they were about Michael. For 2 years, I tried. I brought him to family events, hoping they'd see how he fit in, how he could hold his own in any conversation. I highlighted his business successes, thinking they'd respect his entrepreneurial spirit. I showed them how happy he made me, believing that my happiness would matter more than their snobbery. Instead, they doubled down. The comments got sharper, the disapproval more obvious. They started forgetting to invite him to family gatherings. They'd make plans for me without checking if he was available, then act surprised when I declined. They'd bring up other men in casual conversation, dropping hints about how successful or suitable they were. The message was clear: this relationship was temporary, a phase I'd grow out of once I came to my senses. When Michael proposed, I was over the moon. He'd planned this beautiful, intimate moment, just the two of us on the beach where we'd had our first date. No fancy restaurant, no audience, just pure love and the promise of building a life together. My family's reaction was predictable. Engaged. Dad's voice was flat, emotionless. "Sarah, I think you're moving too fast. You're still young, still figuring out what you want in life. Are you sure about this, sweetheart?" Mom's concern felt performative, scripted. "Marriage is such a big commitment. Maybe you should wait, see how things develop." Emma was less subtle. "Seriously? You're really going to marry him? Sarah, this is a mistake. You'll regret this in 5 years when you realize what you've given up." But I was 26 years old, financially independent thanks to my law firm job, and madly in love. For once in my life, I was going to do what made me happy, not what made them comfortable. That's when the real manipulation started. They didn't outright forbid the wedding. They were too smart for that. Instead, they took control of it. Since they were paying, they reasoned, they should have input on the guest list, the venue, the whole event. What started as input quickly became total control. "The Ritz would be so much more elegant than that little vineyard you picked," Mom said. "And it's more centrally located for our friends." "I really think we should trim the guest list," Dad added. Some of Michael's family and friends might not be comfortable in such an upscale environment. We wouldn't want anyone to feel out of place. Every conversation became a battle. They questioned every choice, criticized every detail, made me feel like my own wedding was an imposition on them. But I told myself it was worth it, that having their support, even conditional support, was better than eloping and creating a permanent rift. God, I was such a fool. The day they canceled everything, I finally saw the truth. This had never been about wanting what was best for me. This was about maintaining control, about making sure I never stepped too far outside the lines they'd drawn for my life. But there was something else, something I didn't discover until later. Something that made their betrayal so much worse than simple disapproval or control issues. The contracts they'd canceled? They hadn't just called the vendors and withdrawn funding. They'd forged my signature on cancellation documents. I found out completely by accident. I'd gone to the Ritz to see if there was any way to salvage the booking, and the events coordinator pulled out the paperwork. "Here's the cancellation notice you signed," she said, sliding a document across the desk. I stared at my name scrawled across the bottom of the page, and my blood turned to ice. That wasn't my signature. It was close, someone had clearly practiced, but it wasn't mine. The S was wrong, the loop on the H too big. Subtle differences that most people wouldn't notice, but I'd been signing my name for 26 years. "Can I get a copy of this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The same thing at the caterer's office. The florist. The photographer. Document after document with my forged signature, authorizing cancellations I'd never agreed to. They hadn't just withdrawn their support. They'd committed fraud. They'd stolen my identity to destroy my wedding, and they'd done it with such casual confidence that they probably never expected me to find out. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the stack of photocopied documents, feeling sick to my stomach. Michael found me there hours later, still in the same position, trying to process the magnitude of their betrayal. "Sarah? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I handed him the papers without a word. Watched his face change as he realized what he was looking at. "They forged your signature." It wasn't a question. The evidence was right there in black and white. "My own parents," I whispered. "My own family committed fraud to stop my wedding." The hurt was overwhelming, but underneath it, something else was growing. Something sharp and dangerous and absolutely furious. They'd crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. This wasn't family disagreement anymore. This was criminal. But why? Why go this far? Why risk everything to stop a wedding they could have simply refused to fund? The answer came from the most unexpected source, my Uncle Robert, Dad's younger brother who'd always been the black sheep of the family. He called me 3 days after I discovered the forged signatures, his voice tight with anger. "Sarah, we need to talk. There are things about your family's finances that you need to know." We met at a coffee shop across town, away from prying eyes and family spies. Robert looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion. "I've been debating whether to tell you this for months," he began. "But after what they did with your wedding, you deserve to know the truth." "What truth?" He pulled out a manila folder, thick with documents. "Do you remember your grandmother's will? The trust fund she set up for you?" Of course I remembered. Grandma had always been my champion, the one person in the family who encouraged my dreams instead of dismissing them. She'd set up a substantial trust fund that would become available when I turned 25 or got married, whichever came first. It was meant to give me independence, to ensure I'd never have to depend on anyone else for my security. "I turned 25 last year," I said slowly. "The money should have been released then." Robert's face was grim. "It was released. Transferred into an account your father controls as the trustee. But here's the thing, he was supposed to turn it over to you immediately. Instead, he's been using it." "Using it how?" "Emma's debts, for starters. That boutique that failed? Funded with your inheritance. The essential oils pyramid scheme? Your money. The credit cards she maxed out and couldn't pay? Your money covered it all." I felt like I was drowning. "How much?" $60,000 so far. But there's more." He slid another document across the table. "Your parents' house, the one they claim is paid off? They took out a second mortgage 2 years ago to cover some bad investments your father made. They've been using your trust fund to make the payments." The room was spinning. "How much is left?" "Maybe $20,000 out of the original 200. $200,000. My grandmother's life savings, meant to secure my future, had been systematically stolen by my own family. And now that I was getting married, now that I'd have a legal right to demand an accounting of the trust, they were panicking. The wedding, I said, understanding flooding through me. They didn't cancel it because they disapprove of Michael. They canceled it because married women have legal standing to audit trust funds, Robert finished. If you'd gotten married as planned, you could have demanded a full accounting. They would have had to explain where the money went. Everything clicked into place. The sudden urgency of their intervention. The forged signatures. The systematic destruction of my wedding plans. It had never been about protecting me from making a mistake. It had been about protecting themselves from getting caught. There's something else, Robert said quietly. I have copies of all the bank statements, all the transfers. If you want to pursue this legally, you have a case. A strong one. I took the folder with numb fingers, feeling its weight like a physical blow. My own parents. My own sister. They'd stolen from me, lied to me, manipulated me, and when I'd gotten too close to discovering the truth, they'd committed fraud to keep me from finding out. The Sarah who'd walked into their house a week ago would have tried to find a way to forgive them. Would have made excuses, rationalized their behavior, found some way to blame herself. But that Sarah was gone, destroyed by their greed and cruelty. The woman sitting in that coffee shop was someone new. Someone who'd finally seen her family for what they really were. Someone who was done being their victim. Uncle Robert, I said, my voice steady for the first time in days, I want to know the name of a good lawyer. The legal consultation was a revelation. Sarah Chin, the attorney Robert recommended, was sharp, thorough, and absolutely furious on my behalf. This is textbook embezzlement, she said after reviewing the documents. Your father had a fiduciary duty as trustee to preserve and protect your inheritance. Instead, he systematically looted it for personal gain. The forged signatures add fraud to the mix. We're talking about serious felony charges if the DA decides to prosecute. What about getting my money back? Civil court for restitution, criminal court for charges. You can pursue both simultaneously. With this level of documentation, it's almost a slam dunk. And my family? What happens to them? Sarah's expression softened slightly. That's the hardest part about cases like this. Financial crimes between family members are always devastating. If we pursue this fully, your father could face prison time. Your mother too, if we can prove she knew about the transfers. It will likely destroy your family permanently. I thought about that for a long time. Thought about family dinners and holiday traditions, and the handful of good memories buried under years of control and manipulation. Thought about the little girl who'd just wanted her parents' approval, who'd tried so hard to be perfect for people who'd never truly seen her. Then I thought about Michael, about the wedding they'd destroyed, about the future they'd tried to steal from me. About Emma's smug smile and my mother's fake concern and my father's cold dismissal of everything I valued. Do it, I said. File everything. I want my money back, and I want them held accountable for what they've done. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Sarah was right. With Robert's documentation and the forged signatures, we had an airtight case. The bank records showed clear patterns of misuse. The canceled contracts proved fraud. Even Emma's social media posts helped our case, showing off expensive purchases and vacations that she couldn't have afforded on her own income. My parents tried to reach out, of course. Phone calls I didn't answer. Text messages I deleted without reading. They even showed up at my apartment once, but I'd changed the locks and refused to open the door. Emma was the most persistent, alternating between fake apologies and angry accusations. Sarah, you're being ridiculous. It's just money. Family is more important than money. You're really going to destroy our family over this? Over some stupid trust fund? Dad's just trying to protect you. When are you going to grow up and realize that? The irony was stunning. After stealing my inheritance and committing fraud to cover it up, they had the audacity to act like I was the one being unreasonable. The criminal investigation moved faster than I'd expected. Financial crimes leave paper trails, and my family had been sloppy about covering theirs. The DA's office was interested in the case. High-profile families committing fraud against their own children made for good headlines. But it was the civil case that gave me the most satisfaction. Watching my father squirm on the witness stand as Sarah methodically walked through each fraudulent transaction, each forged signature, each lie he'd told to cover his tracks. Seeing my mother's face when the judge ordered them to liquidate assets to begin restitution. Watching Emma's expression when she realized her free ride was over and her debts were about to become her own problem again. The verdict was everything I'd hoped for and more. Full restitution of the stolen funds, plus interest and legal fees. Fraud charges that would follow them for years. A public record of their crimes that would make it impossible for them to claim moral high ground ever again. But more than the money, more than the legal vindication, what mattered most was the moment the judge looked at my father and said, "Mr. Thompson, you violated one of the most sacred trusts in our society, the obligation to protect your children, not exploit them. Your actions were not only criminal but profoundly immoral." That was the moment I finally felt free. The wedding we eventually had was nothing like the elaborate affair my parents had tried to control. We kept the vineyard venue from our original plans, invited only the people who genuinely cared about us, and focused on what actually mattered, celebrating our love and our future together. Uncle Robert walked me down the aisle. My college roommate was my maid of honor. Michael's sister gave the most beautiful speech about family being the people who show up for you, not the people who happen to share your DNA. My parents weren't there. Neither was Emma. For the first time in my life, their absence felt like freedom instead of failure. We had our honeymoon in Italy, funded by the restitution money they'd been forced to pay back. Every sunset, every perfect meal, every moment of pure happiness was bought with justice, and it felt incredible. The criminal trial concluded 6 months later. Dad got 18 months in minimum security prison and 5 years probation. Mom got probation and community service. Her lawyer convinced the jury she'd been manipulated by my father, though I knew better. Emma wasn't charged criminally, but she was forced to pay back every dollar she'd received from my trust fund, which meant bankruptcy and moving back in with Mom. The local newspaper covered the sentencing. Prominent attorney sentenced for embezzling daughter's inheritance. The story made it clear that their fall from grace was complete. Do I feel bad about it? Sometimes, in quiet moments, I mourn the family I thought I had. I mourn the parents who might have celebrated my happiness instead of sabotaging it. I mourn the sister who might have been my closest friend instead of my cruelest rival. But then I remember the forged signatures, the stolen money, the casual cruelty of destroying my wedding for their own benefit, the years of control and manipulation disguised as love. And I remember that the family I thought I had never actually existed. It was an illusion, carefully constructed to keep me compliant and grateful. The real people behind that illusion were selfish, manipulative, and ultimately criminal. 3 weeks after the sentencing, I got a text from Emma. "I hope you're happy. You destroyed our family over money. Dad's in prison because of you. Mom cries every day. Was it worth it?" I stared at that message for a long time, feeling the familiar pull of guilt and obligation. The old Sarah would have apologized, would have found a way to blame herself, would have tried to fix what they had broken. Instead, I typed back, "The circus is already full." Then I blocked her number and went back to planning the future I'd chosen for myself. 6 months later, Michael and I bought our first house together, a beautiful craftsman-style home that he renovated with his own hands. We're talking about starting a family, about building something real and healthy and free from toxic manipulation. I changed careers too. Left the law firm and became a victim's advocate, helping other people navigate the legal system when their own families betray them. Turns out there are more people like me than I ever imagined. Children whose parents steal their identities, spouses whose partners drain their accounts, siblings who manipulate inheritances. My story isn't unique, but my willingness to fight back apparently is. The hardest part about all of this wasn't the legal battles or the public shame or even losing my family. The hardest part was learning to trust my own judgment again. When the people who raised you spend decades telling you that you're wrong about everything, your feelings, your perceptions, your values, it takes time to believe that you can see clearly. But I can see clearly now. I can see that love doesn't require you to sacrifice your dreams. I can see that family doesn't mean accepting abuse. I can see that sometimes the people who claim to protect you are actually the ones you need protection from. And I can see that walking away from toxicity, even when it shares your last name, isn't betrayal, it's survival. Here's what I want you to take from my story. Your family doesn't own you. Their expectations don't define your worth. Their approval isn't required for your happiness. And when they cross the line from disagreement into abuse, from control into crime, you have every right to walk away. Would it have been easier to forgive them? To sweep it under the rug and pretend none of it happened? Of course. But easy isn't always right. Sometimes love means setting boundaries. Sometimes protection means taking a stand. And sometimes family means choosing the people who actually treat you like family, not the people who just happen to share your blood. I think about my grandmother sometimes, about the inheritance she left to give me freedom. She would have been horrified to know her own son stole it, but I think she would have been proud that I fought to get it back. That I used her gift to build the independent life she'd wanted for me. My parents took a lot from me. My trust, my security, my sense of family. But they also gave me something invaluable. They showed me who I really am when everything is stripped away. They showed me that I'm stronger than they ever let me believe. They showed me that I can stand on my own, fight my own battles, and build my own life without their permission or approval. And that knowledge? That's worth more than any inheritance they could have stolen. So here's my question for you. If this were your family, would you have forgiven them and tried to rebuild the relationship? Or would you have walked away forever like I did? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I genuinely want to know how you would have handled this situation. And if you believe that freedom is worth fighting for, that your dreams matter more than other people's expectations, that families should build you up instead of tearing you down, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because there are too many people out there who need to hear that they deserve better than the circus they were born into. The circus is full, but your life? Your real life? That's just beginning.